Hello, my name's Heidi. And at 3 a.m., my own father threw me out of the house. No shoes, no suitcase, just because I didn't bow to his new wife. They said I was difficult, emotional, that I didn't understand family. But then I found the altered will, the stolen trust fund, and the proof that they'd been planning my erasure for years. What kind of family scripts your disappearance and then begs when the money stops? Would you have walked away? Or walked into court like I did? I woke up to the sound of pounding on my bedroom door. At first, I thought it was a bad dream, until the second knock rattled the hinges. My heart jumped. I reached for my phone, 3:07 a.m. Heidi! My father's voice came through the wood, hard and sharp. Get up, now. I blinked at the ceiling, confused. Rain tapped against the window panes like 1,000 tiny fingers. I wrapped my robe tighter and opened the door. He was standing there in a wrinkled dress shirt, barefoot, hair out of place, so unlike the man who usually never let a button go unfastened. But his eyes weren't tired. They were angry. Wild. Behind him stood Vera. She didn't say a word. She didn't have to. Her arms were folded, and that look on her face, like she was watching something finally go her way. She didn't even try to look shocked. "What is going on?" I whispered. "You disrespected Vera," my father snapped, "in my house. That's not going to fly, not anymore." What? My voice cracked. "I haven't said 2 words to her tonight. I've been upstairs all evening." He shoved a coat into my hands. "Then maybe it's your silence that's the problem. Pack your things, or don't. Just get out." At first I didn't move, not out of defiance, just disbelief. I stared at him, hoping to see something shift in his eyes. But there was nothing, not even a flicker of doubt. "Are you serious right now?" "You should have listened," he said. That's what he kept repeating as he dragged me to the front door. I didn't even have my shoes. The marble floor felt cold and unforgiving under my feet as we reached the entryway. He opened the door. A gust of damp wind slapped my face. I looked back at Vera. Still no words. She leaned on the staircase railing like she was enjoying a private show. I turned to him one last time. "Dad, this is your daughter." "No," he said. "You were my daughter, before you chose to be a problem." Then the door slammed behind me. The rain was coming down harder now. It plastered my robe to my skin and soaked through my socks before I even reached the bottom step. I walked to the sidewalk, numb. The street was dark. The nearest streetlight flickered like it couldn't make up its mind whether to shine or die out. I sat at the bus stop down the street, legs shaking, the coat he'd shoved into my hands the only thing between me and the chill. I reached into the pocket. No phone. I must have left it on the nightstand. I leaned forward, clutching the coat around me like armor. My head spun, not from the cold, but from the memory of that look in his eyes. It wasn't the first time Vera had tried to edge me out, but it was the first time he'd let her. Just the morning before, I was dusting the old family altar, something my mom insisted we keep tidy, even after she passed. That little table in the sunroom, filled with framed memories. There used to be a photo of her and Dad from their 25th anniversary, her smile soft, his proud. I'd seen that photo every week for years, but yesterday it was gone, replaced by a glossy shot of Dad and Vera at a gala last fall, framed in gold, like it had always belonged there. I'd stared at it for a full minute, dust rag limp in my hand. I didn't say anything. I swallowed the lump in my throat, chalked it up to bad taste, and moved on. I should have known that wasn't the beginning. It was a message. The signs had been there. Vera moving heirlooms around the house, shifting the dinner seating arrangement so I was no longer at the end of the table, but off to the side. Subtle changes, too polite to argue with, but just sharp enough to sting. And Dad, he'd been pulling away too. Quieter, less involved, brushing off my questions with, "Not now, Heidi," or "Let Vera handle that." So I stayed quiet. I told myself not to stir the pot. I played the peacekeeper. But peacekeeping is for people who are allowed to stay at the table. I hadn't realized I was already standing outside the door. I wasn't kicked out because I shouted. I was kicked out because I was still there. And now I was here. On a wet bench in the middle of the night, in my robe, in the rain, no wallet, no shoes. and not a single soul who knew where I was. Then I remembered. My phone had been in the coat pocket after all, hidden under the lining. I pulled it out, hands trembling, and powered it on. No missed calls. One new text. From Dad. "You should have listened." A sob started to rise in my chest, but I bit it down. They wanted me gone, erased. Like I'd never been part of that house, that family, that name. But they forgot something. I still held the trust. The library had just opened its doors when I walked in, soaked from the night before. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly, and a warm blast from the heating vents made me blink hard. I hadn't slept. The bench at the bus stop offered no comfort, and neither did the idea of calling someone to pick me up. I made my way to the far corner, near a dusty window with a view of the back lot. No one else was there yet, just me, a stranger with matted hair and a coat that wasn't mine. I plugged my phone into the nearest outlet, pulled my knees up, and wrapped the coat tighter around my legs. The screen flickered to life, and with it, the ping of missed messages and app notifications, texts from friends, unread calls from numbers I didn't recognize, and then I saw it. A Facebook post. From Vera. The Vaughn Women, Legacy, Grace, and Leadership. The photo was polished, clearly a professional shoot. Vera stood in the center, flanked by two of her cousins and Bryn, her daughter, all in coordinated cream outfits. Underneath, she'd tagged dozens of family members. All except one. I scrolled through the comments. "Beautiful family," one read. Another said, "Where's Heidi?" followed by a string of silence. Someone replied, "She's not around anymore, is she?" Someone else said, "Let's not stir things up." My jaw clenched. I wasn't just left out of the picture. I was erased, like I'd never existed in the first place. It didn't take long before my name was trending, in the wrong circles. The family chat was buzzing, not with concern, but with speculation. Vera was already responding to some of the private messages, spinning the story carefully. "Heidi's going through something. It's best we respect her space." Space? They'd pushed me out the door barefoot and in a robe, but now I was taking space? I closed the app and stared at my reflection in the window. Puffy eyes, dry lips, tangled hair. None of that scared me. What did, though, was how calculated it had all become, how perfectly Vera executed each move. One photo at a time. One story at a time. I stayed in that library until noon. I used the restroom to clean up the best I could, paper towels for my face, a borrowed comb from the lost and found box, and coffee from the vending machine that tasted like burnt cardboard. Around 1 o'clock, I got a message from my cousin Emily. She was always the quiet one at family gatherings, more comfortable texting than talking. Her message was simple. "Aunt Vera asked if you're coming to brunch. She said you should." I stared at the screen. Brunch? After last night? But something about the invitation felt too neat, too orchestrated. Still, I said yes. By 2, I stood outside the Belmont Club, wiping the bottom of my borrowed flats on the doormat. The hostess barely looked at me as she led me to the Vaughn table, where the extended family had gathered in full Sunday best. I walked in wearing yesterday's jeans and a sweater that had seen better days. Vera looked up. Her smile was all teeth. "There she is," she said, like I was a long-lost relative and not the woman she helped throw onto the sidewalk hours earlier. I took my seat quietly, sandwiched between 2 second cousins who didn't make eye contact. Garrett sat at the head of the table, chewing methodically, like nothing had happened. As soon as the waitress left, Vera cleared her throat. "Before we eat," she said, "I just want to address something delicate." The table stilled. Knives paused mid-spread. Conversations died like a snuffed candle. Vera leaned forward, her voice dropping slightly. "I know things have been tense, and I didn't want to bring this up, but I think we should all be honest with each other." She turned toward me, faux concern dripping from her tone. "Heidi, we noticed one of the family heirlooms is missing from my jewelry box." I stared at her. "I'm sure it was just a mistake," she added quickly, palms raised as if to signal peace. But the pearl necklace? The one Celia left behind? It's not where it used to be. Gasps and whispers bounced across the table. A few eyes flicked toward me. Garrett kept chewing. I didn't speak, not at first. My brain told me to respond, to deny, defend, fight. But my heart knew exactly what was happening. It was a setup. Carefully planted, meticulously timed, I pushed my chair back and stood. The scraping sound echoed across the marble floor. No one stopped me, not even my father. I walked out without touching the water glass in front of me. Outside, the sunlight was too bright. It stung. But the air was fresh, and I could breathe again. I walked, not to anywhere in particular, just far enough until my legs started to burn. Eventually, I found myself at White Point Garden, a quiet park at the tip of the city. I sat on a bench beneath a massive oak, one my mother used to love. I remembered how she used to bring me here, when I had a bad day, when Dad was away on business and she needed a break from pretending everything was fine. "You don't fight mud with mud, baby," she told me once as we watched squirrels chase each other through the grass. "You clean your name by walking above it." That was her style. Elegant, quiet, dignified. And I knew what she'd do now. She wouldn't scream. She wouldn't curse. She'd document everything. She'd let people say what they wanted. Then she'd hand over the truth with a smile. I sat there for what felt like an hour. Then my phone buzzed again. It was a message from another cousin. This one, just a photo. A scan of the printed family tree they'd handed out at the reunion 2 weeks ago. My name wasn't on it. She'd scribbled a question underneath. "Did you drop out?" I stared at it, my eyes blurry. I didn't drop out. I was deleted. 2 days had passed since brunch at the Belmont Club, and I still hadn't unpacked the borrowed overnight bag Ruth had quietly dropped off at my Airbnb. It sat by the door like a silent witness to everything unraveling. The room was quiet except for the distant hum of traffic and the occasional creak of old wood beneath the floorboards. There were no photos here, no heirlooms, just me, a bed, and a kitchen that smelled faintly of burnt coffee. That morning, a soft rustling under the door startled me. I'd barely touched my second cup of coffee when I noticed a cream-colored envelope on the floor. No postage, no name on the front. Just the kind of deliberate plainness that made your skin tighten a little. I hesitated, then picked it up and slid my finger under the seal. Inside was a short note, handwritten in tidy block letters. "I worked with your mother. There's something you need to see. I'm in town for 3 days. If you're ready, meet me at 11 a.m. The Red Porch Cafe." No signature. Just as I finished reading it, my phone buzzed with a calendar reminder, except I hadn't set one. 11 a.m. blinked back at me, synced from a calendar I hadn't touched in years. I didn't question it. By 10:40, I was already seated at a back table of the Red Porch Cafe, a small spot near the waterfront with faded red chairs and coffee that was always a little too strong. I sipped from a chipped mug and kept my eyes on the door. At 11:02, a man in his 70s entered. Thin frame, salt and pepper beard, worn loafers. He looked around until his eyes landed on me. He nodded once and walked over. "You look like her," he said, sitting before I could speak. "Same jaw, same stare when something doesn't add up. I assume you're the one who slipped the letter under my door?" He nodded again. "Name's Henry Lawson. I handled Celia's estate, or at least I was supposed to." I raised my eyebrows. "What do you mean, supposed to?" He pulled out a leather folder from his worn briefcase, opened it carefully, and slid a few papers across the table. My name stared back at me, typed neatly in bold. Heidi Quinn. Beneficiary. Primary trustee. Executor of the Vaughn Family Trust. Signed by Celia. Stamped. Notarized. 2 months before she passed. I blinked. "I don't understand. I never saw this version." "You weren't supposed to," he said softly. This was the original final version, but after Celia died, Garrett informed me that a newer version had been drafted, one that transferred oversight to him and Vera. "And you believed him?" I asked, trying to keep my voice even. Henry looked down at his coffee. He showed me a document. It looked real, but I always had my doubts. Then you disappeared from the family record, and I couldn't shake the feeling something was wrong. I flipped through the pages again. This version of the will didn't just name me, it protected the trust from being amended in case of Garrett's remarriage. That clause alone changed everything. Why now? I asked. He shrugged. I'm old and tired, and I liked your mother. She trusted me. I can't undo what I didn't stop, but maybe this helps you do something about it. He stood, placed a small USB drive on the table, and nodded again. That's everything I have. Originals are with my attorney. You'll need a real fight to challenge it. But this puts the law back on your side. Then he walked out. No fanfare, just gone. I sat there for a long time after he left. I reread every page, my hands trembling a little. Not from shock, more like clarity. Focus. Realization sinking in. They hadn't just thrown me out of the house. They'd tried to legally erase me. It wasn't just about power anymore. This was an attack on my mother's legacy, on the promises she made when she wrote my name on those lines. And they thought I'd never see it. I paid for my coffee, gathered the papers, and stepped back into the wind. Instead of going straight home, I stopped by the small legal resource center a few blocks down. I didn't need them to explain the documents. I just needed a scanner and a place quiet enough to think. I uploaded every page, labeled them carefully, and saved a copy to 3 different places: a secure drive, my email, and 1 physical printout. Then I sent a text to Leora. Me. Do you still handle estate law? Her reply came almost instantly. Leora. For you, always. What's going on? Me. Meet soon? Leora. My office. Tomorrow, 9 a.m. I didn't write anything else. Not yet. But the words formed in my head as I walked back to the Airbnb. They tried to burn the paper trail, but I still held the match. That evening, I pulled out the old laptop I'd kept after my mother died. It still had her initials carved into the bottom with a small heart next to them. Garrett had refused to even open it after the funeral, said it was too sentimental. Truth was, he probably didn't want anyone finding what was inside. It took me a few minutes to remember the password. I tried birthdays, anniversary dates. Nothing worked until I typed in the name of the song she used to hum while making tea. Moon River. The screen lit up. Old photos, recipes, spreadsheets. Nothing unusual at first glance. Then, a folder titled In Case. Inside were scanned documents, conversations, notes, letters, and 1 handwritten note with a date written just 2 weeks before she passed. If you're reading this, it means they tried. The ink bled slightly near the edges, like it had been touched by tears or coffee. I stared at it for a long time. Then I whispered to the screen, as if she could hear me through the glass. And now, so will I. The air outside was cooler than it had been in days, a slight break from Charleston's usual late summer thickness. I'd just come back from Leora's office the evening before, my bag heavy with scanned copies, hard drives, and notes that made my entire shoulder ache. I didn't even unpack. I left everything on the couch and fell asleep on top of the covers, still in jeans, with 1 shoe half off. So when my phone rang the next morning and I saw Garrett's name on the screen, I didn't answer it right away. I stared at it until it stopped ringing. He called again a minute later. On the 3rd call, I picked up. Hey, sweetheart, he said, too soft, too easy. Dad, I said, not giving him anything else. I was thinking, he started, maybe we could sit down and talk, just us, nothing formal. That's unexpected, I said flatly. There was a pause, like he'd hoped I'd fill the silence with something warmer. Look, I know there's been tension, he said, but I really think if we just meet and clear the air, it might help everyone. You know how things get misunderstood. I haven't misunderstood anything, I said. But fine, when? He told me he was at the family office that morning, said he had some documents to review, and thought it might be good for me to stop by. No pressure, he added, which, coming from him, only meant pressure in disguise. By the time I pulled into the gravel lot of the family office, the sun was already high, casting sharp shadows against the white columns. It used to be my mother's consulting office. Now it was painted a different color and had Vera's name listed as Strategic Director on the front door. Garrett greeted me at the door with that same half-hug he gave to investors. "Thanks for coming, Heidi. I appreciate you being open." I didn't respond. I walked past him, straight into the conference room where I'd sat dozens of times growing up, coloring while my mother worked. The table was the same. The pictures were not. Every photo of Celia had been replaced with awards bearing Vera's name or framed newspaper clippings from local charity events. Garrett followed me in and handed me a single sheet of paper from a file folder. "I know things have been complicated," he said, "and you've had questions. This document is just a clarification, a cleanup. Nothing changes your role. Just streamlines things for the trust moving forward." I looked down. It was titled Family Trust, Role Adjustment Addendum. My name was on it. He stood across from me, hands folded like he was leading a prayer. I read quickly. 3 paragraphs in, a phrase jumped out. "In the event of family restructuring or realignment, administrative rights may be reassigned to the acting spouse of the primary trust holder." I looked up slowly. "To Vera?" I asked. Garrett blinked, then tried to smile like I'd misunderstood. "It's just a formality. Legalese. It won't affect anything." "You're trying to hand the trust to her?" "No," he said, and then quickly added, "It's more of a safeguard, for continuity." "Continuity?" I repeated. I didn't sit. I held the paper in my hands and let the silence stretch. "Do you want me to sign this now?" I asked. He shifted. "I mean, it would save time, but if you need to review it—" "I already did," I said, cutting him off. "Last night," his eyebrows rose. "I scanned it from your office server yesterday afternoon. You forgot to change the access passwords." He looked stunned for a beat, then cleared his throat. "I didn't realize you never do," I said quietly, placing the paper on the table without signing. "You had one chance to choose your daughter. You picked silence, and that silence is written all over this page." I walked out without another word. He followed me to the parking lot, but only halfway. By the time I got to my car, he was already turning back toward the building. In the window above, Vera watched it all unfold. Her mouth was a hard line, her eyes unreadable. That evening, I returned to the Airbnb and opened my laptop. I pulled up the scanned copy of Celia's final handwritten addendum and attached it to an email addressed to Leora. Subject: Next step. Message: Attachments ready. Filing formal notice tonight. Thanks. Then I logged into the estate portal and uploaded every piece: Celia's will, Henry's notarized records, and the protective clause that locked out posthumous changes from any spouse not named in the original. As the confirmation message loaded, my phone lit up with a delivery notice: Certified mail delivered. V. Dorian. Signed by recipient. I imagined the look on her face as she opened the envelope. I imagined her hand shaking just slightly as she unfolded the document, reading the ink that still bore my mother's name. "You wanted to own the name, Vera. Now I own the legacy." After I clicked submit on the official estate court notification, a strange kind of quiet settled over me. Not peace, nothing as comforting as that, but a calm that felt earned, like finally exhaling after holding your breath too long. 2 mornings later, I was back in Leora's office. Her assistant brought us coffee in paper cups, and I stared out the window while Leora printed the final revocation forms. Charleston's sky looked bruised with clouds, the kind that warned of a storm even if the forecast swore otherwise. Leora slid the last sheet across the table. "This will pause all disbursements until the court rules on full control," she said. "But you're going to shake a few trees today." "That's the plan," I said, signing my name with steady pressure. "They've built their world on those branches." She didn't smile. Not like she used to when we were 20-something interns learning case law and daydreaming about changing the world. Today, her face was as serious as mine. By lunchtime, the trust fund's auto payments were frozen. No more monthly transfers to Garrett and Vera. No more foundation payouts. No more prepaid anything. I didn't need a press release. I just needed numbers to stop moving, and move they did, in reverse. By late afternoon, Garrett was in a meeting with local sponsors when his card declined, twice, while covering lunch. He made a call from the parking lot, pacing. The foundation accountant called Vera. 10 minutes later, Bryn's tuition payment for her semester in Florence bounced, and I didn't pick up my phone once. The calls came in like clockwork. Garrett first, then Vera, then an unknown number, which I assumed was some third-tier lawyer they dragged into it. I silenced them all and went to the park instead. The one where Mom used to take me on days like this, when she needed to remember that life had more color than whatever meeting room tried to flatten her. I sat on a bench beneath a canopy of oaks and watched an elderly couple feed birds. The wind rustled through the leaves with a rhythm I hadn't heard in months. My phone buzzed again. I glanced down, voicemail from Garrett. I let it sit, another buzz. This time, a text. Garrett, you cut the fund? You can't do that. This affects your whole family. I read it twice, then typed my reply without flinching. Me. I know. I read the documents you tried to trick me into signing. I trust you taught Vera to read hers, too. He didn't reply. That night, the phones kept ringing. I kept writing, emails, scans, everything filed and backed up in triplicate. Not just for court, but for me, for my sanity. I wasn't trying to destroy them. I was stopping the bleeding. The kind they'd caused when they took what wasn't theirs and called it inheritance. By the end of the week, the rumors began. The Charleston Register ran a quiet headline buried on page 4. Questions raised about Vaughn Family Foundation accounting. The whispers in town were louder than the article. Did Vera mismanage the money? Why hasn't Garrett made a statement? Wasn't that trust supposed to be for the kids? I hadn't spoken publicly, I hadn't posted a word. But silence, used right, makes noise on its own. Ruth called that Friday evening. Her voice was soft but clear. I know you're being painted dramatic, she said, but I see through it, and I want you to know you're not wrong. I swallowed hard. Thanks. I sat through a dozen dinners listening to Vera pretend she built that legacy. But I was there when your mom wrote the first draft. She built it for you. You were supposed to carry it, not them. I let that sit in my chest for a moment. Something warm bloomed through the ache. I'm not giving it away again, I said. I know, Ruth replied. And they're scared. That's why they're scrambling. She wasn't wrong. 2 nights later, I came home to a package sitting upright against my door. No return label, no note. Just a small white envelope with my name printed on it. Inside, a USB stick, a label taped to it in blocky handwriting. Play this before you go any further. I stared at it for a minute, thumb pressing into the corner like it might reveal something. If they were already this scared, what's on here must be worse than I imagined. The USB stick sat untouched on the table for almost an hour. I'd made myself a cup of tea, then let it go cold, poured another. Walked around the living room twice, staring at the shadows moving across the hardwood floor as the sun slipped behind the oaks. The stillness in my Airbnb felt too intentional, too quiet for what I was about to hear. Eventually, I sat down, slipped the drive into my laptop, and clicked open the only file it contained, an unmarked video labeled with nothing but the date. I don't know what I expected. Maybe a scanned document, a recording of a family brunch, some benign piece of evidence meant to nudge an already open wound. But what played on the screen felt like betrayal in HD. The camera was hidden, positioned at an angle from behind a framed painting on a wall I recognized instantly. The study at the foundation office. Garrett's voice came first, low but clear. She's becoming a liability, he said. Emotionally unstable. Always has been. Vera's reply was crisp, measured. Then we lean into that. We play the long game, use her reaction against her, let her dig her own hole. My stomach clenched. I leaned in closer, fingers tightening around the ceramic mug. Garrett laughed, an ugly, hollow sound I'd never heard from him before. If she gets emotional, we'll say she's irrational. If she fights back, we'll call it harassment. It's worked before, Vera added. They knew. They had planned every moment of my erasure, every sideways look, every omission, every cold glance from relatives who once kissed my forehead and said I was my mother's twin. I paused the video halfway through, not because I couldn't stomach the rest, because I needed to absorb what I'd already seen. This wasn't just neglect, it wasn't misunderstanding, it was strategy. I hit play again. At one point, Garrett said, "Once the revised version goes through, she'll have no standing. She won't even know until it's too late." "She's not stupid," Vera muttered. "She's tired," he corrected her. "There's a difference, and tired people make mistakes." I closed the laptop without finishing the last minute. I didn't need more. They'd buried me on purpose. Later that evening, just past 9, a notification popped up on my phone. A video message from Garrett. His face filled the screen, sleeves rolled up, tie askew. His eyes were red, but I wasn't sure if it was from crying or whatever performance he was about to deliver. "Heidi," he began. I'm sorry." He paused, inhaling deeply. "This isn't what I wanted. Things got complicated. Vera, she thought she was doing what was best for the family, and Another pause, a shake of the head. "I should have spoken up sooner." I waited. I waited for the words that mattered, the kind that took ownership, that said, "I chose wrong. I abandoned you." Instead, he said, "But you know, you've always been difficult, hard to reach. You have this way of twisting things. It made it tough to trust you sometimes." I pressed delete without watching the rest. There it was, the real Garrett, the one who cried only when it cost him something, the one who apologized just enough to feel noble but blamed enough to stay innocent. The next morning, a knock came at the door. I opened it to find a young man in a blazer holding a thick white envelope. "Heidi Quinn?" he asked. "Yes." "You've been served." He handed me the envelope and turned without waiting for acknowledgement. Inside, a cease and desist letter from Vera's legal team. They accused me of defamation, breach of fiduciary duty, cyber harassment, and weaponizing family assets for personal vendettas. I didn't scream. I didn't throw anything. I walked to the kitchen, opened my laptop, and sent an email to Leora with one subject line. "Now?" She called within 5 minutes. "We've got more than enough," she said before I could speak. "I've already prepped the response, a 52-page breakdown of every violation we've tracked, including the Foundation's misuse of charitable funds. I've flagged 4 transfers for federal review." "Good," I said, sitting back in my chair. "Send it." "Already done." By late afternoon, Vera's legal team received a formal reply. No settlement, full countersuit, documents en route to the IRS and State Attorney General. They sued because I had power. We responded because I had proof. That evening, Ruth called me again. "They're unraveling," she said. "I bumped into Garrett at the market today. Couldn't look me in the eye." "Let them," I replied. "They've been hiding behind politeness for long enough." "You just keep walking forward," she said. "You're almost there." After the call, I turned off the lights and sat in the dark for a while. Thinking. Feeling. When you grow up believing your family is sacred, betrayal doesn't come in just one color. It comes in quiet tones, in polite shrugs, in tears that pretend to be regret. But it doesn't change what was done. I checked my email once more before heading to bed. Leora had just sent one line. "I just got subpoena notice. They're trying to preempt you in court." I didn't panic. I smiled. Let them. I've already started writing the last chapter. By the time I pulled into the parking lot across from the Foundation Gala, dusk had turned the Charleston sky a deep lavender. I stayed in the car for a few minutes, watching through the windshield as well-dressed couples stepped onto the red carpet, smiled for photos, and disappeared inside. No one knew I was there. No one had invited me. That was the point. I adjusted my black blazer in the rearview mirror. Not for vanity, there was no camera waiting to catch me, but for armor. I opened my phone and checked the clock. 6:57 p.m. My fingers hovered over the screen where the post sat in draft mode, already loaded onto my social media accounts and queued across 3 advocacy groups I'd worked with in the past. 3 minutes. The posts weren't dramatic. They didn't name-call. There was no colorful language or emotional appeals, just numbers, dates, screenshots, bank transactions, a copy of the original will, and excerpts from the version they'd buried. I didn't need a sob story. I had receipts. At exactly 7:00 p.m., I tapped publish. Then I stepped out of the car, crossed the street, and leaned against the wrought iron fence that bordered the venue. Through the windows, I saw Vera speaking to a group of donors near the fireplace. She wore navy blue, the color Mom always said projected control. Garrett stood a few feet away, smiling politely at someone holding a wine glass. Inside, no one knew their phones were already lighting up. It started as a ripple. A waiter paused mid-step. A woman in a sequined gown lowered her flute of champagne to check her screen. Then another, and another. I watched Vera's face change. First confusion, then stillness, then something far colder. She reached for Garrett's arm, whispered something in his ear. He froze. I turned and walked away before the first news site even picked it up. By midnight, it was everywhere. Charleston charity faces scrutiny over financial mismanagement. Exclusive, documents suggest misuse of Vaughn family trust. Original will reveals conflict at heart of estate dispute. And underneath it all, comment after comment. This explains a lot. Wait, they erased her from the family tree? Why hasn't Vera responded? They didn't need to. The silence was the response. Of course, the counterattack came quickly. By morning, a blog surfaced under a pseudonym. Long, winding, poorly edited, but accusing me of everything from narcissism to borderline delusions. There was even an audio clip, heavily edited, where I supposedly said, "I'll destroy him if I have to." It was my voice, but cut and stitched so clumsily that even someone half awake could spot the manipulation. I didn't flinch. I called Leora. "We'll let them post," I said. "Then we'll subpoena every server they touched." That afternoon, Ruth called. Her voice carried a mix of pride and exhaustion. "They're desperate," she said. "You rattled them." "I didn't think it would hit this fast," I admitted. "They built their reputation like a house of cards," she said. "It was always going to fall fast. It just needed the right gust of wind." Still, there was a weight to it. The names they were calling me, the whispers about my mental health, the subtle jabs about me being unstable, jealous, too damaged to inherit that kind of responsibility. It was exactly the same script they'd used on my mother. Toward the end, when she started questioning the way Garrett handled the money, later that night, 2 messages came in from people I hadn't heard from in years. The first was from an old high school friend who now worked for a local nonprofit. "We saw what they're doing to you," she wrote. "If you need a statement, I remember how Vera talked about you even before your mom passed. She always made it sound like you were fragile, like you couldn't handle real life. It never sat right." The second was from a former coworker of my mom's, one I only vaguely remembered. She once told me, "If they ever try to take this away from Heidi, it'll be because they can't control her. I think that day has come." I sat with those words for a long time, because for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like I was standing alone. At noon the next day, I checked my email for the 100th time. There it was. A court confirmation that my petition to re-establish the original structure of Celia's trust and remove Garrett and Vera as trustees had been accepted. The hearing was set, all documents validated, all signatures in place. It was happening. No more side skirmishes. No more games of reputation management or who could out-host the other at brunch. Next week, we stopped pretending blood means loyalty. I didn't sleep the night before the hearing, not from nerves, at least not the kind that made my hands shake or my thoughts run in circles. It was a deeper unease, the kind you feel when something that once defined your life is about to be laid bare in front of strangers in suits and wooden benches. By 8:30 a.m., I was standing in front of the Charleston courthouse, dressed in navy blue, hair pinned tight, every detail chosen to project one thing: control, not grief, not anger, not pity. Garrett, Vera, and Bryn arrived together, like they were walking into church, all crisp lines and polished shoes. Garrett's jaw was set so tightly it looked like it hurt to breathe. Vera, as always, was poised, but the lines around her eyes betrayed a different kind of tension. Bryn seemed unsure if she should follow their lead or disappear into the floor. I didn't speak to any of them. Inside the courtroom, reporters filled the back rows, some familiar from charity events, others, newer, chasing the scent of public disgrace. I sat on the left side with Leora beside me. She kept her files stacked neatly, her demeanor cool and unreadable. As always, she let the facts speak before she did. The judge, a gray-haired woman with a tone that brooked no nonsense, opened the session without preamble. "Let's proceed." Leora stood. "Your Honor, we'll begin with documentation regarding unauthorized withdrawals from the Vaughn Family Trust. These funds were allocated for educational and charitable disbursements per the original trust established by Celia Quinn." She walked to the center, handed over a folder. "Within this, you'll find a breakdown of financial transactions initiated by Vera Dorian, who was not legally appointed as trustee, as well as evidence that Garrett Vaughn signed off on these without proper consent." The judge skimmed, her brow furrowed. "And the total amount misallocated?" Leora didn't blink. "Just under $274,000. One major payment went directly to cover tuition for Bryn Dorian's university semester abroad." A hush fell over the room. I watched Vera's spine stiffen. Leora turned to the bench. "Miss Quinn will now speak." I stood, walked slowly to the podium, met the judge's gaze. "The trust my mother created wasn't built for people who saw her as a stepping stone," I said clearly. "It wasn't a prize, it was a promise, and it certainly wasn't meant to fund a lifestyle that excluded her own daughter." Vera shifted in her seat. Garrett looked straight ahead. "My mother's final addendum," I continued, "stated explicitly that in the event of remarriage, her wishes were not to be altered. That clause was ignored. Her name was buried along with her will, and mine was nearly erased in the process." Vera tried to speak, but the judge raised a hand. "You'll wait your turn." I returned to my seat. Garrett's attorney began to murmur something, but Garrett stood on his own. "If I may," he said quietly. His voice wavered. The judge nodded once. Briefly. He looked at me. Not past me, not through me. For once, he looked at me. "I thought I was doing what was best for the family," he said. "I didn't realize how far things had gone." My fingers curled against my leg, nails biting skin. "Mr. Vaughn," the judge said, "intentions do not absolve violations." She turned to her clerk. "Enter Exhibit 17. Proceed with ruling." The clerk handed her a single page, my mother's handwritten clause, validated and notarized. "I find the actions of Garrett Vaughn and Vera Dorian in breach of the original trust stipulations," the judge said. "Trustee rights are hereby revoked. Administrative control is reinstated to Heidi Quinn. Furthermore, restitution must be made for misappropriated funds within 90 days." Vera rose from her chair. "This is a smear campaign." "Sit down," the judge said flatly. Garrett tried to interject. "Your Honor, I never—" The officer standing at the door moved slightly forward. I leaned in and whispered to him as he sat, "You chose silence. This is the cost." He didn't reply. When the gavel struck, it didn't feel triumphant. It felt final. Outside the courtroom, the media swarm was immediate. I moved quickly through them. One reporter, a younger woman with wide eyes, mouthed, "You did it!" I didn't stop walking. In the hallway, Ruth was waiting. She opened her arms, and I stepped into them without hesitation. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. Across the lobby, Vera stormed through the double doors, heels clacking like bullets on tile. Bryn stood still, shoulders tight, eyes darting around like she'd just realized the roof was gone. Garrett remained seated inside, staring at the bench where I'd stood. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table with the lights off. My computer glowed against the dark, and I opened the application I'd drafted a month ago, an educational fund submission under a foundation name no one in my family knew. Recipient: Bryn Dorian. Full tuition. 1 year, no credit required. I hovered over the button, then clicked send. She never needed to know it came from the woman they tried to erase. The letter arrived the same week the ruling became final. Not an email, not a voicemail. Handwritten, folded carefully in a soft blue envelope with no return address, just my name on the front, in ink I immediately recognized. Vera's handwriting. I turned the envelope over twice before opening it. My instincts were still sharp, my caution intact. But curiosity, and something that felt vaguely like obligation, pushed me to read. Heidi, I'd like to talk. Not argue, not litigate, just talk. I'll be at the church garden Friday at noon. If you choose not to come, I'll understand. V. I sat with the letter for hours. Part of me expected it to self-destruct, like in a spy movie. Another part wondered if I should bring someone, Ruth, Leora, anyone, to sit nearby in case it was some elaborate attempt to twist the knife one last time. But Friday came, and I walked to the church garden alone. It was quiet, the kind of quiet that wraps around your shoulders like a blanket and reminds you that grief and grace often share the same silence. Vera was already seated on one of the stone benches under the dogwood tree, wearing black slacks and a pale blouse, hair pulled back too tight, like she was trying to hold herself together by her roots. She didn't stand. She just looked at me and nodded once. I didn't sit right away. I stood in front of her, arms crossed, letting the moment stretch longer than it needed to. I never hated you, she said finally. I blinked. That's a strange opening. She clasped her hands together in her lap. I couldn't let Bryn live in your shadow. I tilted my head. So you erased me, lied about me, drugged me with your words in every room I walked into? She sighed. You were always so sure of yourself, so much like your mother. That wasn't a compliment. No, she admitted. It wasn't meant to be. We sat in silence for a while. Leaves fluttered above us. A couple passed through the garden, speaking softly, not noticing us. I thought if I could protect what Bryn had, she said, then maybe she'd have a shot. Maybe people wouldn't compare her to you every time she entered a room. I didn't soften. I didn't lean forward or touch her hand. I wasn't there to reconcile. I was there to understand the shape of the damage. You didn't need to erase me, I said. You just needed to raise her. She nodded slowly, eyes fixed on the ground. I suppose you're right. There was nothing else to say. I stood and walked away. She didn't follow. Later that afternoon, I went to the bank. It was quiet there, too. Most people didn't fund scholarships anonymously, but I wasn't most people. And Bryn, despite her silence, deserved a life untethered to the poison that had spilled between her mother and me. I finalized the transfer, double-checked the name, and handed the paperwork to the manager. She'll never know it came from me, I told Leora that evening over the phone. She doesn't need to, Leora said. Some things aren't about thanks. I smiled into the receiver. No, they're about ending things the right way. 1 week later, I stood beneath the magnolia tree where my mother's memorial had once been planned before Vera canceled it in favor of a cocktail fundraiser for the foundation. This time, there were no photographers, no catered food, just a folding table with a linen cloth, a bouquet of fresh lilies, and people who had known Celia Quinn for who she truly was. Ruth read a poem. One of Mom's friends from her advocacy group told a story about how Celia once spent her weekend helping a woman she barely knew avoid foreclosure. Someone else played an old voicemail where Mom laughed mid-sentence. We all laughed with her. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was clinging to her memory. I felt like I was living it. That night, I returned to my apartment, a small sunlit place with creaky floorboards and a bookshelf I built myself. On the shelf sat 3 framed photos, one of Mom, one of me and Ruth at the courthouse, and a third frame still empty. I don't know why I hadn't filled it. Maybe I was waiting for something that didn't exist anymore, or maybe I'd left it open for the future, to remind myself that there are parts of life still unwritten. I leaned back into the sofa and stared at the wall across from me, feeling the stillness not as absence, but as peace. I wasn't trying to rebuild the family, I was trying to rebuild what family meant to me. The next morning, I visited the cemetery. The groundskeeper nodded as I passed. He remembered me from when I'd fought to have Mom's grave moved back to the original plot she chose, before Vera changed the order without telling anyone. I knelt by her headstone, brushed a leaf from her name, and placed a single lily at its base. "They tried to write me out," I whispered, "but I wrote you back in. And that will always be enough. Sometimes, family isn't defined by blood, but by the courage to stand alone when everyone else turns their back." Heidi's story reminds us that silence in the face of betrayal is not strength, but reclaiming your voice is. Have you ever had to fight to be seen in your own family? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more powerful true-life revenge stories and emotional journeys like this one.